Hey everybody, this is Steve Moore, owner of Run More, a brick and mortar running store in Westminster, Maryland. Today I sort of wanted to do something different from what we usually do. I just wanted to talk about carbon plated shoes and non-carbon plated shoes and when to wear carbon plated shoes. It's a question we get asked a lot. I actually gave a talk recently for a running club about sort of the differences and why you might want to wear one and why you wouldn't want to wear one. So I just thought maybe we'd answer some of those questions today on just some things that I have personally experienced and some questions that I get asked frequently, and maybe help you guys make those decisions as well. Obviously, carbon plated shoes have been around for a bit. They really came on the scene a lot when Nike started putting them out, but they'd been around prior to that. I had been running in carbon plated shoes for some period of time, but really they became in the mainstream. We started seeing more Nike stuff and world records and Kipchoge and 2-hour marathons and all that kind of stuff. So people come in quite often, and it's one of the first shoes people pick up off the wall, and they'll say, I want this shoe. And it's not just runners. It's amazing. I would say of all of the shoes that I carry on my wall, honestly, of all of the shoes, this shoe gets picked up more than anything else. I'll have people come in and say, I've heard great things about this shoe. I would love to use this. I'm a walker, I'm a nurse, I'm looking for something, and I've heard that the Carbon X is a great shoe for that. I don't know why. I think part of it looks awesome. But this is a carbon plated shoe that's very popular that I've logged a bunch of miles in. In fact, I brought in one of my old Carbon X's because this is Carbon X1. I've run a ton of miles in it, from anything from like a road 5K up to a marathon on the NCR trail. And it's just something fun that I could putz around into. They have a lot of good responsiveness to it. It has a carbon plate into it. Obviously, they're designed to help rocket you forward. You can tell some of it's based in the geometry, some of it's based in the midsole, and some of it's based in the carbon plate itself. What we have found over time is that every bit as important as the carbon plate itself, and in fact, some studies report even more so, it's the midsole material that we're finding that has a huge advantage to it. What the plate itself does a lot of times is it adds extra stability to the shoe, and it gives you something to push off from. So if you think about a shoe, and it's actually pretty easy to see in something like a Vanish Carbon. This Vanish Carbon has two different layers of their really responsive midsole material to it, and sandwiched between them is a carbon plate. This specific model has a forked carbon plate, so it's designed to kind of give you a little bit of extra stability depending on which way you go. And we're going to double back to that in just a minute. But just for our intensive purposes now, we've got this really soft, responsive, energy-charged midsole material sandwiched between a carbon plate in there. The idea being is as you're running, this is really soft and responsive, and when you step down, that plate almost gives you something to push off of so you don't sink all the way down. I've talked a lot in some other videos about shoes that are super soft and why I don't necessarily like them, because I feel like my energy is all wasted going into the ground. There are some shoes on the wall, so there's some just everyday Hoka shoes, or some shoes that are more high cushion, soft shoes. When people come in and say they want to feel like a marshmallow under their foot, I get it, I appreciate it. That's not what I personally like to run it. I want to feel something that's going to help me kind of get that energy out of back of my foot. I kind of go back to the very first time I ran in a pair of Brooks Levitate. It like changed my whole thought process of what running shoes can be. This was years ago, and I'd been wearing just everyday neutral shoes. I was a big fan of Brooks stuff back then, and stuff like that. Their everyday midsole that they were using was great. It was cushy, it was fine. But once my sort of brain understood what the potential was in some of these shoes and the technology in the midsole, it was like, oh my gosh. And now that's really what I'm searching, because I don't want to feel like I'm wasting going down. I want to feel my energy going back that way. So the technology has really enhanced in the midsole as much as the plate, because the plate has been around. We carry stuff like the Superfeet that is a carbon. That has a carbon plate in it, and it's just an orthotic. It's a very stable orthotic designed to kind of keep your foot from pronating one way or the other. This is the same similar concept. It's going to help you as your form is kind of breaking down, give you some extra stability, but also provide extra push when you're sinking down a little bit into this midsole. The problem that some people might have with it is that it can feel a little more rigid, and it can kind of force you to do things that you might not necessarily want to do. One of our staff members here, Colleen, when she ran Boston, I think it was 2019, it was when people were really getting into some of the Nike stuff, and she said, I saw many runners that were sort of sitting on the ground after the race on curbs, dealing with Achilles injuries, and she said almost all of them were wearing the Nike stuff. They were wearing all of the really nice carbon-plated Nike shoes, and they said it was so much in the torque of that shoe that it was causing injuries. It's really challenging, right? Because there's definitely some benefits to it. The 4% is designed to tell you that it's going to make you 4% more efficient and make you 4% faster. And if you're somebody who's on that Boston cusp, or somebody who's really chasing those age group records, or just your own personal records, 4%'s a ton. You think about that over the course of a marathon. If you're on the verge of a 3-hour marathon and you're looking at 180 minutes, what 4% is going to do is going to make a huge chunk of time off. You're willing to take that risk to give yourself that reward of getting that goal time. So putting on a plate makes a lot of sense. But the problem is in those longer miles is as your form is going, you might not want something as rigid in there or something that might unnecessarily force and change your gait. Going back to something like a Carbon X, this shoe has a single plate into it, and it's kind of designed on a curve. So it's not giving you necessarily the stability from the side to side, but just forward. So maybe as you're moving this way, it's rocketing you in different ways that you might not want. If you're gonna do something that's more carbon plated, I like the idea and concept of something that is more forked that will have different movements depending on what you're needing. And that's what this shoe really, this is the Vanish Carbon from Ultra, is as you might be changing your form, the plate is gonna kind of move and help balance you out a little more to neutral. But I will tell you on a personal level, I actually find just as much fun and flexibility in something like a Vanish Tempo or just a shoe that has a maximum same responsiveness, something like the Hyperion Max that we just talked about in a recent video from Brooks, or like something like the Rebel 3 from New Balance that has a similar midsole feel to it, that responsiveness without the unnecessary feel of a plate. Something that's not so rigid, because as you kind of get tired, you're getting all the cushion from this shoe. You're not wasting energy down, but you can have a little bit more flexibility in the movement of the shoe without feeling so rigid, because you might not want that. And it might not feel as comfortable late in the race too. That's a very common thing I hear from people that try to use a carbon plated shoe in a marathon, because you're not having a lot of chances to try it ahead of time, right? You might take it out there and do a 10 or 15 mile tempo run into it to kind of make sure it fit and feels right. Give yourself a chance to understand the mechanics of it. But you're not used to running in it past 20 for the most part. If you got a brand new pair of shoes and you're going to run it in the marathon, you're going to try to get that BQ time, you want all the performance out of that shoe. It's pretty fresh out of the box besides your tempo training runs into it. You might not be used to what your body's going to do when you hit that wall at 20, and now your form's a little jagged, your form's a little off, and that shoe is doing things and fighting you because it is so rigid and forceful in there. If you can find a shoe that might have that same awesome bounciness and not have that plate, that might be a better option for you. Because there was a study in Outside Magazine, they were saying that is 6 times more, the midsole is 6 times more important than the plate in some of the super shoes. And the geometry of the self-fit shoe is also going to make a big difference. And all the shoes sort of have that deal. I ran a marathon and this is the A6 Metaspeed. You can see they all have sort of those same characteristics to give you a nice toe off, but the midsole itself is a huge proponent of what is doing that shoe and why it's getting you to do what you can. The other thing we found on some of these shoes is they're quite expensive and the durability isn't as good. So you want to kind of save those shoes for special race day, understandably, because they're expensive shoe. I've had reports, one of my good friends ran a marathon in a super shoe. It broke down after one race. It's like, I spent $250 on this Nike shoe. I got one race out of it. So you want to save those for your special day, right? But you're not used to what's going to happen to your body when you get past 20, because you're not going to run that shoe in like 4 or 5 different marathons. I'm going to go ahead and guess. So you're kind of in this catch-22. You want to get the dirt, you want to get that explosiveness, and you want to get that extra 4% that you might find in this shoe, but you might not be able to test it in real-life situations until you get to race day. It might not agree with you because it's forcing you to do things. So I guess what I'm saying is you kind of have to know what you're going to do, what you're going to kind of get into this shoe, and don't assume that every carbon-plated shoe is going to work for you, because they all have different things inside the carbon plate. Again, if I was looking for one, I would look for shoes that have either a forked opportunity or like I've run a lot of miles in the Tecton from Hoka. This has 2 different plates that are designed to kind of balance out and work with your form and not try to push you in ways that aren't necessary or natural for you. So stuff that has a little more variation inside the plate might be better for you. And I know there are people that run every day in super shoes. Again, I mentioned Outside Magazine. I have a friend of mine from back in the day named Corey who writes for Outside Magazine. And he's talked about that he runs in super shoes all the time. Totally fine for Corey. Corey's also run a 343 1500 back in the day, so he's in a different caliber for us. He's used to running and galloping and huge gaits and such, so he's in a different world than most of the people that are looking up to pick up a carbon-plated shoe to run a 3 or 4 hour marathon and hoping to break their own PR. So you kind of have to think about what you're looking for, and if you're willing to risk all that on a shoe that you might not be able to push to its limits until you get to race day. I think you'd probably be better off, at least for me, is finding a shoe that has like the right midsole for you and go from there. And then, like, again, I use the Tempo as an option because I talk about it in here a lot, is this shoe has all the components of a carbon plated shoe without the plate into it. You can almost get every bit as benefit. Again, if we're deciding that the midsole is just as, if not more important than the plate, focus on finding the midsole and the shoe and the comfort and fit first, and then maybe think about the plates second. That's just my benefits. And I also wouldn't necessarily recommend running in a super shoe all the time, even if you are somebody at that caliber we just talked about, because it can over time put a lot of pressure on your Achilles. It is an unnatural feeling for a lot of people to have that thrown forward feeling. So again, you're definitely more prone to injuries. It seems like unless you're at a certain caliber of runner, if you're an everyday trainer or just an everyday runner, you might not think about running in a carbon plated shoe every day. It might not, the risk reward might not be there. Anyway, I hope that kind of helps you a little bit more digest what's going on with carbon plated shoes and help make a decision if it's worthwhile for you to invest in a shoe like a carbon plated shoe. And I've run in a bunch of them. I pulled a bunch here. I've run in a lot of carbon plated shoes and with different degrees of success on a personal level with them. Thank you so much. If you have any questions, I'll do my best to answer them down below. And do me a favor, if you are going to go through and shop with us, enter promo code RUNMORE. You'll save 10%. We'll ship out your products for free. And if you could do me a favor also, like and subscribe to our channel. It certainly helps us find new people out there. And happy running out there. And I hope you guys find a fun new shoe and you can go out there and smash all your PRs. And if you're in our area, stop by and visit us for a run. Check out our shop. We'd certainly appreciate it. Have a good day. Happy running. See you around town.